Welcome to Antarctica Did That For Me. We're a podcast for everyday people with a little adventure in their hearts. We're Keri and Cassa, and we've spent huge chunks of our time living and working in Antarctica. Welcome to a journey that changed our lives. We hope it will change yours too.
Welcome to another episode of Antarctica Did That For Me. So today we are going to be getting into signs. And of course, you're probably going to have a lot of different sign songs running through your head. I saw the sign, signs, everybody's sign. But I'm Cassa Grant. I'm one of your hosts. And I'm here with my co-host, Keri Nelson. Yes.
Hey, everyone.
And we love this topic, actually. So we wanted to talk about sign culture on the ice and signs everywhere and the sign culture that we see around us. So, Keri, tell us a little bit about some of the categories of signs that we identified down in Antarctica.
To bring it back for a second, Cass, I don't know why I was surprised. It's not really surprising because this is life, at least as an American, probably a lot of places. But it surprised me at how many signs there were in Antarctica when I got there. There's just signs everywhere. Lots of people wagging their fingers at you and having all sorts of opinions about trying to instruct you through these signs. But they kind of do break down into a few different ways that people are giving us information in written form on things posted on the wall or the roads. We've got the official kinds of signs that are place and directional signs. There's a lot of signs that you'll see in hallways and buildings. And if you're in the store, there's signs everywhere. If you're putting away your dishes, there's signs everywhere. And those are more like instructional, sometimes wag the finger kind of signs. And then there are signs that are just the community is posting for funsies. And those signs come up too. But if you walk through a building at least in American Antarctica, and I expect other countries' Antarctica too, you're going to see a whole lot of walls talking at you from all of the instructions and things that people put on them, right? You've noticed that, I'm sure.
Absolutely. And I mean, the one that comes up, I think immediately came to my mind when we were thinking about doing this, the topic is it's kind of a combination of a fun sign and an official sign. So, and it's one that's probably been defaced over and over again, but there's a stop sign at a very critical junction in McMurdo Station. And I remember noticing this right when I first got there. And it said across the top, it said don't, and then it said stop, and then it said believe in on the stop sign. And I just thought, whoa, I'm in a different place. This is kind of amazing.
Yeah, right. And that sign, that stop sign, because it's it's a road and vehicles really do have to stop at it. It's not really supposed to have any stickers on it. So it is a perennial activity for Antarcticans to see this blank stop sign and start slapping stickers on the stop sign. I've actually seen it say stop hammer time too, when the don't stop believin' stickers were taken off of it. It once said stop hammer time or other funny things, but then somebody is assigned to go and scrape all of the stickers off of the sign, or a new sign goes up and then it sits there for a while. And then slowly the funny comments come back on the sign until maybe the stop sign is obliterated by stickers again. And then off comes the stickers and you start over again. But that's actually a really good melding of an official and Antarctic community thing happening there as far as signs goes. So I know that sign very well. That sign just came up on my Facebook feed as a Facebook memory for me the other day. Beloved sign. But it's not the only institutional sign there. There are signs that are just kind of always the nice sign. Like there's a very nice official McMurdo Station, a very nice official Palmer Station sign. So you can get to sort of that official place naming stuff. This is another one of my institutional favorites or bigger road signs. For people who don't listen all the time, I should explain that Scott Base, New Zealand's base, is just a couple of kilometers away from the American base, McMurdo Station. And there's a road that connects the two bases. And one year on that road between two bases, somebody in the middle of the night put up a sign that said, "Welcome to McMurdo," with the golden arches. It looked like a McDonald's sign. And it was the funniest thing. And that did not last very long. That was quickly determined to be not allowed, not accepted. That sign came down. But I think we offer these bigger institutional signs up as just an example of how the community play and official messages all end up on signs or on a wall or talking to the community all the time. So that was one of my favorite all-time signs. But they're not just big institutional signs, right, Cassa? There's lots of talking going on inside of the hallways too.
Yes.
I know you were telling me about some pretty funny examples of that. So jump on in. Tell me what you got.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I guess the other thing I want to talk about really quickly too, before we move away from official signs, is that kind of rite of passage. When you stand next to the McMurdo Station sign or the Scott Bay sign or the Palmer Station sign, it's this kind of like, I made it. Look at me. Like, I mean, you could fake that somewhere else,
right?
Like some of it, this sign printed out, but it can be like a really big deal. And, you know, I mean, I think almost every season I would take a new picture of myself next to the various McMurdo Station signs, because it really felt like a good way to acknowledge what we've been doing, where we were, you know? So I think that that was a really important part of those official signs for sure.
The signs do have a purpose. There's a lot of instruction that happens and a lot of commemoration of things that happen with these signs.
And I think that there can also be a really interesting blend. And I saw this with the way finger wagging signs, I like that name for it, but the way that people would use them with a sense of humor, but still with the clear communication happening. And I love that blend, actually. So one of my favorite ones was there was a woman who worked in the galley. So she was like a dining attendant. And there were these tofu nuggets that would come out every now and again. And those of us who love tofu nuggets really love tofu nuggets. Like they were so good. And, and it was like an event, right? It was just like, there's tofu nuggets. Like I would get emails from people like there's tofu nuggets. Cause like there was like certain of us that really loved them. So this one gal, she put up a sign, this whole story of every time tofu nuggets come out, like I'm always working somewhere else. So what I'm going to offer you is like $1 for a bowl of tofu nuggets. Or like, and she had this whole, like, here's how it'll work. You'll call me on this number. Like the whole plan for getting together to exchange the tofu nuggets and the money or whatever. Or it was just
do the deal on the side.
And then people were writing like, I love you so much. And like writing on the sign, like, this is the best thing I've seen in a while. And it was just such a fun way to engage and try to get the thing that you wanted, which was tofu nuggets.
I mean, I think that one thing that you're getting at is, you know, we're not specifically talking about this, but it's a real window. Antarctican culture, we've talked a lot about the work, you know, in this podcast and the things that we've done as duties and things that we've learned, lots and lots of things. But I don't know if we've gotten a lot into just sort of the humor and the fun of Antarcticans. If we've really driven home that point to people who are listening to this podcast, that people who come down can be very silly and very creative. They're full of life. They're full of ideas. Many are artists. Many are, I don't know, just creative thinkers. And so when you're talking about the way that a sign can kind of devolve into comments and just people having more to say about it than just what the sign says, that's absolutely a characteristic of Antarcticans. I'll bring up another, I guess, food related sign since we're already in the galley talking about galley signs. Take it back and just say fresh food is precious in Antarctica. You get some shipments in. It's got to go around at McMurdo to 1,000 people. You have to only have your share of what came in. And so things like lettuce, things like tomatoes, things like, this is where I'm getting at, bananas are very, very precious. And there's some people who aren't going to like any of the food, but if something fresh comes in, that's what they want to eat. So in the galley, there used to be a big painted sign that whenever bananas would come in, somebody had made a sign that said, don't be a banana hog, har har. And they would put this banana sign by all the bananas. And it was just sort of a wag the finger, also humorous, don't take more. The meaning was don't take more than your fair share of the freshies, specifically bananas, because people want to grab those, but don't be a banana hog.
Which then became a t-shirt and a name of a band.
Exactly. It's so good. Yeah.
That's a good one. And then the other one that really came up for me when I was thinking about this was there was one, oh man. So there's a main highway that runs through one of the big building in McMurdo that has like the store and the galley and kind of a lot of the little like town functions in there. And they call it Highway 1. And there's like a bulletin board on the side there. I still don't know who did this, but I would love to find out. They created this like ransom note. And there's this one guy who ran the fleet operations department for a long time, who was just like an iconic man and a wonderful, lovely man. And so they were basically directing it at him. So he was just like one of these characters I've been talking about. But they had created this like, ransom note that was like, we've got your iPad. And so, and if you don't, like, I can't even remember what they wanted in return for the iPad. But then the funniest part was that they'd taken a picture and like literally cut and paste a picture of an Etch-a-Sketch that they thought was this guy's iPad, or they were saying was his iPad. We're holding your iPad ransom. And then they just created it just started to escalate. That it was like, oh, really? So you think you can just get away with ignoring us? Well, guess what? And then the pictures of the iPad gets hurt, and they smashed the screen of the Etch-a-Sketch, and there was a picture of that, and then there was C4. They made it look like C4. It was probably an eraser. I'm gonna blow it up, and all these hilarious progressions, and it was they were all taped to each other, so it was probably 8 or 10 different pieces of paper of this story progressing. So it wasn't just a sign; it was a sign with a sign with a sign with a sign. Oh man, I couldn't wait to see if they had put a new thing out the next day. I would go oh, is it still up? What they put up this today? And it was just amazing. I have all the pictures of that one, and still makes me laugh. Still makes me laugh.
Oh man, that's funny. Well, you're getting at another kind of sign that goes up, which is kind of community signs, community having fun signs. And I have a couple of other examples of that too. Before I get into that though, just to kind of big picture it for people who aren't really familiar with the community, I'm just going to say, what is the nature of this community that we're talking to each other in signs in the first place? It's because it's a rotating community. Many people are there for just a few months at a time. When you come into a brand new environment like Antarctica, you don't really know what to do, and you have zero time to learn. Your orientation is very brief. You're learning your new job and maybe a couple jobs. You don't have a lot of time with the person who's taking off and leaving Antarctica. And so there's a lot of how to be an Antarctican down there, how to sort your trash, how to put your dishes away, where you can be at certain hours, what kind of community rules. You don't have time to actually sit down and hear all of those things with somebody before. You just have to be at work. So signs do a lot of the heavy lifting of getting the community on the same page and operating smoothly. And so a lot of the signs we're talking about are, just sort of instructional signs that sort of tell you how to do life. But that is not what that iPad sign was. And I have another sign that's also not in that category. One of my favorite things that appeared on a wall in McMurdo Station was every year they try to build an ice pier at McMurdo Station. And as it becomes warmer in this world, there is a more and more of a struggle with building this pier because the weather conditions and the temperature conditions don't always support an ice pier holding together. They build this ice pier so a ship can come up with supplies at the end of the season. But I was there one year when the ice pier was just breaking up, huge cracks. They worked all winter to make this ice pier, and then huge cracks in the summer appeared, and they could never use the pier, and it just broke up. And that pier became a real haven for Waddell seals. So it basically just became a kind of a seal colonized by seals. It was never able to be used by Station. But on the bulletin board, the same bulletin board you were talking about, there were some wanted ice pier signs that went up. And even funnier, somebody made a little piece of paper that was like a puzzle, started moving the pieces of that puzzle all over the bulletin board as if the ice pier was floating away from the original sign, which it was floating away from the original pier. And then somebody started slowly adding little seals to every piece of that ice pier paper that was floating away. And I thought, man, this community is so freaking creative. It is so funny. The memes that would go up on that same board were the gold standard level of the best internet memeing and funniness that you could ever put up there. And I just always thought I'm not nearly as funny as these people who are these are signs for nothing more than the community's amusement. Really funny stuff. I just really appreciate that about the community.
And I would say, it's definitely for amusement, but it's also for interaction, right? And so I think that, you could maybe interact in a way that you normally wouldn't be able to interact. Maybe smaller communities, you're going to have more of this kind of thing because that's the culture of the place.
There's a lot of community feedback about these signs. Generally people, not necessarily the funny signs, but just the kind of, here's how you do this, and you must do this way, and you must do this way. And I think people feel a little bit automatoned or regulated, or people do talk about signs and why are these up? You hear people complaining about all the signs all the time. So it's definitely something that registers with the community. Do you think there are too many signs in Antarctica, Cassa?
No, I don't actually. I mean, I think that maybe sometimes they're poorly written, and that is a problem for sure. But I think, as what you said, it's a 24/7 community. There's a lot of turnover. There's not a lot of ways to tell people. However, I will say there are probably too many signs that are really too long, Like if it's like a brick of text, I'm not reading that. Like who, I'm not doing it. Right. So you have to figure out how to use the visual of the sign as well. I mean, or what cracks me up too is like the ones that you can tell somebody was really mad when they wrote them. Cause like it's all caps, it's bolded, it's underlined, it's italics, you know, and then they're using quotation marks in weird places to like add emphasis. And it's like, that's not how you use quotation marks. Yes. I really don't take this seriously. But you're like, this sign was more about this person getting out their anger and their frustration than it is about an actual attempt to educate. And so that's, you know, the other thing here too is like we're trying to get the system to run as smoothly as we can, but there can be aspects of control. And I think that's where people start to lash back against any kind of signage, right? Because you don't tell me what to do. It's this kind of passive aggressive, like it feels like someone's berating you and then you're really not going to pay attention to that sign. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And you're right. I totally skipped the category of, I guess, what I would consider just sort of bossy signs or wag the finger signs. And when I'm thinking about that, it is coming from that one person who doesn't like the way somebody ground the coffee and left, I don't know. I can't even tell you an example, but there are very personal preference signs and somebody will hang it up and just think that they're making it a rule for everybody because they hung the sign up. And then that means that's the rule. And that absolutely causes community friction sometimes, as it would. You've got 1,000 people with 1,000 different ways of doing things in life. And you can't regulate the pace at which someone walks down the hallway necessarily for every person, or you can't regulate, unfortunately, the volume at which somebody might shut a door. You know, those are little micro individual decisions that people make just as a matter of being a human in this world. And some people are more considerate than other people. But I do see people get into real loops, like posting sign after sign, trying to just control all of the behavior of all the people living around them. And, you know, they can try, but I think we've both seen how successful that is. It really just succeeds in making that person more frustrated, more angry, because you just can't control people at that level, I don't think.
You know, there's this level of a fear of conflict, ironically, right? So it's someone who maybe is making a sign from that perspective is afraid of having a conversation. And so they think, well, I'll just put up this sign and then they know how I feel. But what it really does is
get really offended when people don't follow the sign.
Yeah. And what it really does is actually the opposite of what they're trying to achieve, which is connection and agreement. That just because you put up a sign or you say, I expect this, does not mean that you're going to get agreement, right? But ones that are informational around, like the trash sorting one is actually a really great example of those signs where they are actually kind of longer than I would normally say is ideal for a sign, but it's because it's giving you more context.
I just want to contextualize that for people listening, like what we're talking about when we're talking about trash. In Antarctica, at least in the American program, there is a really nice attempt to sort trash into a lot of different categories. So all the trash leaves the continent, it's shipped out on the boat. But in order to find places to put that trash, we as community members are required to sort into a lot of different categories. Like at one time I was there were 17 or 18 different categories to sort trash. So if you want to get 1,000 people to do that, you need signs to really communicate how this kind of metal might be different from this kind of metal, and this kind of paper might be different from this kind of paper. You're making very micro decisions about the things that you're throwing out. So that's the sign culture Cass is talking about. It's just, it takes a lot of signs to do that.
It takes a minute to learn that system. And again, I think that to varying degrees of success, right? Like the people who were working with waste management they just still had to sort. They still had to do things. But overall, I think those signs really helped a lot.
Well, I spent a lot of time working in housing and the store and station services and places where there was a lot of life and home comfort stuff going on in the worlds that we managed. And so there were a lot of signs that went up as part of the process of kind of telling people how the laundry machines worked and how this process worked, or, you know, that sort of thing. And we definitely had designated people from that department who could make signs. And there was a huge department at the time. So you were not supposed to make signs if you were some of those 20 people, because of exactly what you're talking about. Too many signs, mixed messages. You wanted to make sure that they were very concise, very clear, and not overwhelming the walls like wallpaper of signs. Like you had to pick and choose your signs. And that seems kind of controlly as a department, but I absolutely understand where that's coming from because of individual decisions to kind of rule set as you go to personal preference. Doesn't always work season after season when it's a total rotating cast of people who are on the ice at any given moment, many of whom have never been there, many of whom will never return.
But I think that this has a really good carryover into the real world in terms of messaging in general, right? Like we have have to pick not necessarily battles, but we have to pick our messages. We have to pick our key things that we want to focus on in work, in life. I mean, as a parent, as a partner, you have to pick, what is the thing that I really want to get across here? What is the outcome I'm trying to get? A lot of times what you cut away is actually going to help you more, right? And that's what you're talking about there. I think one of my favorite dryer signs, though, had a picture of a dog on it that said, "Empty the lint trap or face the consequences." And it was like a Rottweiler or something. And I just loved it. I was in one of the dorms and it was just so great. So, I mean, but that's the other point I have there too, is like, how can you make things more entertaining or more funny? And then you are going to help people remember to do the thing. I do leadership coaching. So as a leader, how can I bring humor in, or how can I bring a little bit of storytelling in to help it stick and help people actually go, oh yeah, that's funny. And yes, I still need to empty the lint trap,
There's the physical signs, and really that's what led us into this discussion about signs in general. I think both of us are always looking for signs that we should be doing this or that. I suspect people who are interested in this kind of podcast are also kind of looking for signs as a directional. Did you have any moments where you experienced something in Antarctica where you thought, that's a sign, I should be doing something different?
I found myself being a lot more open to the way that signs might look to me. Does that make sense? If it created a visceral reaction, then that was important to explore. And it could look a lot of different ways. There's one of the sayings, I don't remember who says this, but it's like, fear is basically excitement without taking a breath. For me, it was learning to distinguish between when it was actually just like, no, that is not for me. I don't want to do that. Or is there some excitement there that's me not taking the breath? And that's part of why I'm kind of having this kind of negative reaction to this. And I think you just learn this more as you get older, because I think you can overanalyze this stuff too. I think a lot of times people will just be like, well, they'll overthink it, or that sign is this. The number one sign you have to follow is yourself. But it's paying attention to those, because we've been conditioned to not pay attention to our own signs or our own patterns or our own, desires, for lack of a word, because of, we have to be logical or we have to do this. And as I get more into business as well, I mean, some of the people who are the best leaders or the best CEOs, they will tell you, you have to trust your intuition. And however that shows up for you, It could be different types of signs. That is something that, is woo-woo to a degree, but it's also something people who are successful will tell you this too. It's not just look at your tarot cards or whatever. It's like, oh no, this was a sign and I had to take it.
I do look for signs that I'm on the right path in my life. The very first Christmas that I was in Antarctica at McMurdo Station, my very first year, I was really homesick because it was also the very first Christmas that I had never spent with my family. And I was at that point into my 30s. So that was just the absence of being around people who I was always with, and knowing that was the first time that it happened was really emotional for me. And I remember walking down to this area we call Hut Point at McMurdo, which is just kind of a little bit far away from the station, but still pretty close. And it's a place where a lot of Waddell seals kind of gather. And it was this very sunny, still day. And I was the only one down at Hut Point because everybody was still kind of celebrating Christmas and having that big meal. And I was so emotional. I was crying. And I remember watching the seals, and it was so quiet that I could actually hear the seals breathe. And I could hear the sounds that the seals were making from my perch at Hut Point. You probably don't know this, people who are listening, but Waddell seals, when they make noises, it sounds like almost R2-D2 in Star Wars. They sound like electronic noises deep within their bodies. They don't even sound like, to me, they're coming out of an animal. And I remember hearing those little noises, being shocked by those noises, hearing the seals breathe in these long, long, gorgeous breaths in and out, and how peaceful they were and how at peace they were, and thinking, I had to leave home to experience this. There is no way I would be on Christmas Day watching these seals unless I left home. And for some reason, that was a sign for me that it was okay to be there, that it was necessary that I take that step away from that tradition I had had all of my life in order to experience some new things. That kind of sealed the deal for me. You know what I mean? I was kind of half in, half out foot. Do I want to have this kind of contractory life? But when I had that realization that giving up some things also means getting things that you wouldn't have ever had before, that was it for me. Which now, as I say that, I'm like, wait, that's the whole theme of our podcast. So that was actually a pretty good story to relay, but that was a real sign for me. Absolutely. It's the number one thing I think of as a sign that I was supposed to be there. So.
Oh, I love that. I mean, I actually have a similar one around Christmas, but it's not in Antarctica. So this is actually a sign that happened many years ago. I was pining for a young lad, an English lad. And I decided to go. I got the jankiest. I mean, I had long layovers. It was the worst, most miserable flight. But I got like a $400 ticket to the UK at Christmas. I don't even know how I did this. And I went over to the UK to spend Christmas and New Year's with him. And kind of a similar thing. Like, I mean, I think I was 24 or 5 at the time. And I was feeling really sorry for myself. I wasn't with him on Christmas Day because of various things. And I was in London. I was super jet lagged. I was tired, and I was in a hostel because and so there was like 4 or 5 beds. And these other girls, they were like Dutch, and they were like friendly together, and they had like little Christmas hats and candy. And I was like feeling like, oh, I don't have anybody to celebrate with. And they gave me some candy. They gave me some little Christmas hats. They were really sweet. And then the movie Elf was on the TV, and I sat down and watched it. And that was my sign of like, you're Cassa Grant. Go put your red shirt on and go out and do something on Christmas, right? So then I go out, and it was cold, and I'm walking around London, and everything was closed. Everything. I didn't have any food. I had like a Cliff Bar that I had for breakfast, and I didn't realize that everything was being closed on Christmas. And then across from like the Houses of Parliament, I could see people going in and out of this like kind of sunk down door. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll just go see what's going on. And it's this pub that's like packed full of people, and they're serving food, and I'm like, okay, sign me up. And I asked this like couple, like, can I sit with you? And they're like, yeah. And they were the friendliest, nicest people, had an amazing dinner with like a classic English Christmas dinner. It was so good. Just had this like faith in humanity, and like, hey, guess what? Remember, like, yeah, you're a little bit lonely. Yeah, you're a little bit scared. You can get up and do stuff. And I mean, because I could have just stayed in that hostel bed all day until I called my family. But like having those little signs along the way really helped me like have an amazing Christmas, a very memorable Christmas, and a very fun one. And then I went home and called my family.
Well, dear listener, let this be a sign to you. Cassa and I have shared our stories here. We are trying to encourage you to have these big, brave steps into the world too, and just be a little more open to the world. And look what comes out of it when you look for the signs around you, right?
And you think about, again, what signs you want to give out too, of like, what is the thing that you're hoping to get out of any kind of, I mean, it doesn't have to be signage necessarily, but how you're presenting too. I think that's a really important thing to think about.
So that's your call to action this time. Take a look for the signs around you. What should you be doing? Could your sadness about not having the thing you had before lead you to some grand adventures in your future? Look for the signs, and then think about the signs that you see around. Maybe if you're going to hang a sign, think about your message. That's what we got for you for this week. So thanks for listening, everybody. It's been a lot of fun talking with you.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Antarctica Did That For Me podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support our efforts, we would love it if you would tell your friends. And if you leave us a review on Spotify or Apple, it will help us find more of our fellow adventurers. We release a new episode every Tuesday, and we are a video and audio podcast, so you can watch or just listen. We're on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and more, or find everything, including links to our social media, at our website, antarcticadidthatforme.com. Thanks again for listening, and until next week, keep thinking about what opening your own heart to adventure could do for you.